Tonight, we begin with a revelation that U.S. immigration officials had feared, tracked, and desperately tried to warn about, but no one was listening. A trap, a legal trap, one that did not unfold over years of policy debate, not over months of courtroom battles, but in a single moment, a single wire transfer, a single number on a bank screen, a single moment that ended one family's American dream. A single moment that triggered a federal investigation before anyone even realized what was happening. A single moment that is happening right now to people just like you, all across this country. What thousands of hardworking, law-abiding immigrants are doing every single month has crossed a legal line that federal authorities have been watching silently. And when that line is crossed, ICE, the IRS, and the Department of Justice do not hesitate. They do not warn you first. They respond with speed, with subpoenas, and with the full weight of federal law. You are not being told this by your bank. You are not being told this by the wire transfer company taking your money. And you are certainly not being told this by the government until it is already too late. So stop what you are doing. Because in the next few minutes, this information could be the difference between staying in America and being removed from it. For years now, there had been quiet signals, not in government press releases, not in immigration court filings, just whispers, that federal financial enforcement agencies were preparing something that would hit immigrant communities like a sledgehammer. The federal government has been watching money transfers, yes, but they have been increasingly precise in their watching. Their enforcement moves have followed a certain rhythm, a patience, almost a silence. The kind of silence that experienced immigration attorneys recognize as the moment before the storm. But what sent alarms through legal communities and financial compliance offices in 2026 was that the public warnings about this issue went completely quiet. Attorneys who monitor Bank Secrecy Act enforcement know what the indicators look like. The sudden expansion of FinCEN data sharing agreements with ICE. The surge in suspicious activity reports filed against remittance senders. The coordinated training between financial crimes investigators and immigration enforcement officers. The sudden disappearance of any public guidance for immigrant communities on remittance compliance. All of it went quiet. And when the federal government goes quiet on something that affects millions of immigrant families, it does not mean the danger has passed. It means the enforcement has already begun. Early in 2026, legal investigators and immigration attorneys detected what they could only describe as a coordinated financial enforcement dragnet, targeting ordinary immigrant families who had no criminal record, no criminal intent, and no idea they were breaking federal law. These are the kinds of enforcement tools that the federal government only deploys when they are signaling something very specific. A major crackdown, a policy shift, or a deliberate campaign to generate immigration enforcement leads through financial crime referrals. Legal observers could not immediately determine which category this situation fell into, or whether it fell into all three categories simultaneously. But what they did know, with absolute certainty, was that the federal government had changed its posture toward the everyday financial activity of immigrant workers. And when federal agencies shift enforcement posture without public announcement, even quietly, immigration attorneys immediately pay attention. Here is the rule at the center of everything. It is called the Currency Transaction Report Threshold. The number is $10,000. Under the Bank Secrecy Act of the United States, any cash transaction, any wire transfer, any money order, any cash deposit that reaches or exceeds $10,000 is automatically reported to the federal government. No exceptions, no delays. It is reported the moment it happens. But that is only the beginning of what you must understand tonight. The alarm being sounded by immigration attorneys and financial law experts right now is not routine. It is not a theoretical concern. It is not a distant risk that applies to someone else. It is urgent, it is immediate, and it is aimed directly at you. Attorney after attorney, advocate after advocate has described what is happening to immigrant families who unknowingly violate federal financial laws using the same words: devastating, irreversible, and completely preventable. If only someone had warned them in time. The dangerous assumption is simple. People assume that by keeping their wire transfers under $10,000, they are staying safe. They are staying legal. They are staying invisible to federal authorities. That assumption is not just wrong. That assumption is a federal felony. Federal enforcement did not hesitate when they identified this pattern. In fact, their prosecution of a legal concept called structuring is among the most aggressive financial crime enforcement we have seen directed at immigrant communities in the modern era. Here is what you need to understand with absolute clarity. Within weeks, sometimes days, of a family sending multiple transfers just under the $10,000 threshold, federal investigators flagged the behavioral pattern. Not because the money was illegal, not because the family was connected to any criminal organization, but because the pattern of transactions itself triggered a suspicious activity report from the financial institution, a report that federal agencies, including immigration authorities, have direct access to. These were not routine bank compliance reviews. These were federal-level financial investigations activated by the pattern of legal transfers sent by ordinary, hardworking immigrant families. Tonight, let us be absolutely precise about what the law requires, what it prohibits, and what it will do to you if you are not informed. The $10,000 threshold, what it does. Any single financial transaction of $10,000 or more automatically generates a currency transaction report filed with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. This report contains your full name, your address, your identification documents, and the complete details of the transaction. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has access to this database. This is not speculation. This is federal law. The structuring trap, the rule that is destroying families. If you send $9,800 on a Monday and $9,700 on a Wednesday, you have committed a federal crime. It does not matter that both amounts are below $10,000. It does not matter that the money was earned legally. It does not matter that your only intention was to support your mother, your children, your family overseas. Under Title 31 of the United States Code, deliberately breaking up transactions to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold is called structuring. And it is a federal felony punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison and the seizure of every dollar involved. The suspicious activity report, the trap most people never see. Federal law does not only require reporting of $10,000 transactions. Banks and wire transfer companies are legally required to report any transaction pattern that looks suspicious, even at amounts of $3,000 or $4,000, if the behavior appears designed to avoid federal reporting. Increased transfer frequency, sudden changes in remittance amounts, or repetitive transfers to the same overseas account can all trigger a suspicious activity report filed directly with federal authorities. They targeted the structuring, they targeted the patterns. They targeted accounts belonging to families who had no criminal intent, but who had unknowingly placed themselves inside the exact behavioral profile that federal financial crime law was designed to catch. This is why the warning tonight is so urgent. Federal law does not investigate your intentions. It investigates your transactions. And here is where the situation becomes even more alarming. Legal sources now believe that the current wave of financial enforcement targeting immigrant remittance behavior is specifically designed to probe the financial vulnerability of non-citizen communities. Generating immigration enforcement leads through a back door that most families never knew existed. Federal agencies wanted to see whether these communities would self-correct after informal warnings. They did not, and so formal enforcement accelerated. What followed was not a targeting of criminals. It was a targeting of patterns. Families who transferred money faithfully every month, documented, consistent, traceable, suddenly found themselves with frozen accounts, federal subpoenas, and in some cases, criminal referrals that fed directly into immigration removal proceedings. Financial crime attorneys speaking with immigrant legal advocates describe the enforcement shift in chilling terms: a systematic repositioning designed to generate immigration enforcement actions from financial data without ever requiring an immigration-specific trigger. But here is the truth that must be spoken clearly tonight. These families are not criminals. They are providers. They are the people who wake before sunrise, work through exhaustion, and send money home because their family depends on them. And the federal government has constructed a legal framework in which that act of love, performed incorrectly, becomes a federal crime. Their transactions were not hidden. They were not laundered. They were documented with such clarity and consistency that federal investigators could reconstruct years of family support payments and then use that documentation as evidence against the very people who made those payments. As enforcement data continued emerging throughout 2026, the full scope of this issue came into sharp focus. FinCEN carried out an expanded data sharing protocol with ICE, forcing hundreds of case referrals that began not with immigration violations, but with banking compliance flags generated by ordinary remittance behavior. Major wire transfer companies, operating under strict federal compliance requirements, targeted accounts showing elevated activity in recent months, filing suspicious activity reports that fed directly into federal law enforcement databases without any notification to the account holder. Regional banks and credit unions, terrified of their own federal compliance exposure, reportedly flagged recurring monthly transfer patterns used by immigrant families to send support payments, patterns that would appear entirely normal to any human observer but triggered automated federal reporting systems. This is not routine banking. This is not isolated immigration enforcement. This is the convergence of the most powerful financial surveillance infrastructure on Earth with the most aggressive immigration enforcement posture the United States has maintained in a generation. And ordinary immigrant families, people who work hard, pay taxes, and send money home to care for the people they love, are walking directly into this convergence without knowing it exists. Remember, immigrant communities once believed that wire transfer companies were safe, neutral, and private. They believed the money they earned legally was beyond federal scrutiny as long as they declared it honestly. They believed that staying under $10,000 was the entire rule, the complete protection, and that following it meant they were invisible to enforcement. Tonight, the exact opposite is proven true. Wire transfer companies are federal compliance partners. Their legal obligation is not to you, it is to the federal reporting system. Legally earned money, transferred in patterns that resemble structuring, is still a federal crime. And the $10,000 number is not a safe threshold. It is a tripwire, and the area around it is mined just as heavily as crossing it directly. What makes this moment so dangerous and so deeply urgent is that this enforcement is accelerating at the precise moment when immigrant families are already under the most pressure they have faced in years. Families overseas are depending on consistent monthly support. Immigrant workers here are trying to send as much as possible, as often as possible, to meet that need. Communities want financial privacy and freedom from government surveillance. Advocacy organizations want legal protection for families who are breaking no moral law. Every one of these pressures pushes immigrant families toward the exact financial behavior that federal law criminalizes. And they are navigating this dangerous landscape without a map, because no one gave them one. When people in desperate financial situations make urgent decisions without legal guidance, they are not acting from carelessness. They are acting from love. They are acting from responsibility. But love and responsibility do not constitute a legal defense in federal court. The federal government's enforcement posture, now coordinated across FinCEN, the IRS, ICE, and the Department of Justice, sends one unambiguous signal. Federal authorities will not allow the Bank Secrecy Act to be ignored, intentionally or unintentionally, in any community, in any amount, for any reason. Federal officials have stated plainly that breaking remittance payments into smaller amounts to avoid automatic reporting is inconsistent with federal financial transparency law. That is careful bureaucratic language. The plain translation is this: we know what you are doing, we can prove it with your own bank records, and we will prosecute it regardless of your intent. You do not hear that level of coordinated cross-agency enforcement language unless something large-scale and systemic is already underway. Immigration and financial law attorneys have addressed their communities directly, urgently, and without softening the message. They have said the $10,000 rule is real, it is actively enforced in 2026, and it does not care about why you sent the money. They have said structuring is not a technicality. It is a felony charge that can strip you of your savings, your freedom, and your right to remain in this country. And they have said, if you have already sent money in patterns that could be flagged as structuring, do not send another dollar before speaking with a qualified attorney. These are not rhetorical warnings issued for dramatic effect. These are statements from professionals who have sat across the table from immigrant families facing federal charges for sending money home to their parents. Here is what makes this situation even more alarming than it first appears. The financial surveillance of immigrant remittance behavior is not limited to wire transfers. It is expanding simultaneously across multiple financial channels. Cash-intensive small businesses owned by immigrants are facing elevated scrutiny on deposits and withdrawals that mirror remittance patterns. Mobile payment platforms including Zelle, Venmo, and Cash App are now generating federal tax documents and cooperating with federal subpoenas at unprecedented rates. International money service businesses serving high-volume immigrant communities have dramatically increased their federal compliance reporting in response to regulatory pressure. All of this is happening simultaneously, all within the same enforcement window. When federal agencies activate multiple financial surveillance tools at the same time, it does not mean a general compliance sweep is underway. It means a targeted enforcement campaign is in progress, and the targets are people sending money home. Legal analysts are now considering what immigrant families can expect in the months ahead. One possibility is that enforcement will intensify further as interagency data sharing expands and federal prosecutors pursue structuring charges as a pathway to immigration enforcement actions. Another possibility is that community education and legal advocacy will succeed in changing financial behavior fast enough to reduce exposure before enforcement sweeps become more visible. The third possibility, the one that worries advocates most, is that thousands of families are already inside the enforcement pipeline right now, with frozen assets and pending investigations, and simply do not yet know it. But there is one answer, one immediate action that removes your exposure from this equation entirely. Know the law, follow the law, send your money the right way. Do not send multiple transfers timed to stay under $10,000. Do not split transfers across family members to avoid thresholds. Do not assume that because you have done something before without consequence, it was legal. Speak to an attorney, document everything, and understand that in this enforcement environment, the best protection is not silence, it is compliance. What we are watching right now is a test of awareness against enforcement. Federal agencies are testing whether immigrant communities will continue operating in financial ignorance, generating enforcement cases from the behavior of people who simply did not know the rules. And immigrant communities are being tested on whether they will receive this information, act on it, and protect themselves before the knock on the door comes. Tonight, legal advocates and immigration attorneys are monitoring this situation closely, and their guidance is consistent and urgent. They say, never send multiple wire transfers in amounts designed to stay under $10,000. Not within the same week, not within the same month, not even between different family members. They say, if you must send large amounts, send them transparently as a single transaction, and maintain documentation of the legal source of those funds. And they say that if you have already engaged in transfer patterns that could be interpreted as structuring, the time to speak with an attorney is not after you receive a federal notice. It is right now, tonight, before anything else happens. The families who act on this information, informed, deliberate, and legally guided, will be protected. The families who continue without this knowledge will remain exposed. Their response must be immediate, precisely documented, and legally sound, sending a message to federal enforcement systems that this community understands the rules and follows them. As 2026 continues and federal enforcement data continues to emerge, we will learn more about the full scope of what has already been set into motion. But what we know with certainty right now is that this warning is timely. It reaches families who still have the ability to change their financial behavior. It provides the legal knowledge that no bank, no wire transfer company, and no government agency has offered. And it ensures that the money you have worked through exhaustion to earn does not become the instrument of your own removal from this country. What happens next depends entirely on what you do in the next few days. If families receive this information and act on it, this moment will be remembered as the warning that protected an entire generation of immigrant families. If families continue without it, federal enforcement has already demonstrated that it is ready and willing to act. And tonight, for the first time in years, the intersection of American financial law and immigration enforcement has quietly pointed itself directly at some of the hardest working people in this country. The banking system is quiet, too quiet, and when federal enforcement systems go quiet, it does not mean the danger has passed. It means the cases are already being built. It means the patterns have already been flagged. It means they are choosing their next moves with extraordinary care. Because tonight, immigrant communities across America must understand, many for the very first time, that good intentions are not a legal shield. That love for your family is not a legal defense. And that not knowing the $10,000 rule will not protect you from its consequences. This story is far from over. But tonight, 3 things are absolutely clear. The law around sending money home is more dangerous than most people realize. The enforcement of that law is more aggressive than it has ever been. And the families who arm themselves with this knowledge tonight are the families who will still be here tomorrow. We will be watching every development as this next phase of enforcement unfolds. Share this with every family you know, every community you are part of, every person you care about. Because this information, right now, tonight, could be the difference between everything you have built and losing it all.